Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And She Thrived is here to provide you with the tools that are so much needed when going through a divorce. We want you to know that you are not alone and that you are supported, and to provide you with these resources so that you may become more empowered and a better version of yourself. We want to hear from you and build community with you. So please do let us know in the comments how we might better serve you. Now enjoy the next episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone to And She Thrived, which serves to hold space for Muslim divorced women. Today I've got Rosy Arpa with me. Assalamu alaikum, Rosie.
Assalamu alaikum.
Marhaban. Thank you for joining us today.
Marhaba fiki.
Okay, so we're just going to begin with a brief bio of Rosie. Rosy Arpa is an academic and researcher based in New York. She has a PhD in Islamic Studies and has written widely in academic publications such as Zaytuna College's Renovatio journal. She came to the US for her first marriage and she has one 5-year-old daughter. She is now remarried. Rosie lived for a long time in the Middle East, where she learned Arabic and also studied Turkish. For fun, she enjoys practicing different languages, traveling to new countries, and chasing her daughter around in the playground. Okay, great. Thank you so much. We're so happy to have you here. And I also want to thank you for being so willing to share your divorce story with us. And we would begin with the first question. If you don't mind telling us a bit about, if you could just tell us first about yourself, your work, how long you were married for, and then how long ago were you divorced?
Sure. So I'm originally from the UK. I grew up in London and I came here in 2012, I think. I was married for 6 years, almost 6 years, I think. And I've been divorced now for 5 years.
Okay. Anything else you want to add on your work, or you want to?
Oh yeah, on my work. Yeah. So I'm an academic. As you mentioned in the bio, I studied for many years learning Arabic, Islamic Studies. I work mainly in philosophy. And I really began my career after my divorce.
Okay. That's so interesting. And mashallah, you're so very accomplished. What I do want to ask you, because I know that you have had a very challenging divorce. So if you could tell our community here that what were those biggest challenges that you experienced during your divorce and after? If you could just relate your story.
Yeah, probably the biggest challenge is it happened very suddenly. So I wasn't really I initiated it, but it was not planned. It had never really seemed like a possibility to me until I had I guess what they call a light bulb moment, where I suddenly knew that I was unsafe and I needed to get out. And so it happened so quickly. And I had moved around a lot with my ex-husband, following him to different places for his career, and I was living in a new country. And at that point, I was not a US citizen. I think I was kind of vulnerable in some ways. Like I said, I hadn't started work. And it was really hard navigating this huge change in a new place. We'd just moved to a new city all over again. We'd lived in lots of different places, and I'd only been there for like a month, I think, when the marriage kind of very suddenly came to an end. And that was the hardest thing, not having any support network, having to build everything from scratch while going through this very traumatic time. It was like immediately after the birth of my daughter. And so navigating motherhood, a new place, a foreign place, and a very sudden traumatic divorce was a lot to handle.
Okay. So let's look at the divorce itself, because you mentioned feeling unsafe. Was that something that just occurred to you towards the end of the marriage, or was this like something that was experienced pretty early on?
It is, I guess they sometimes describe it like boiling frog syndrome, once I had the light bulb moment, I realized this had been going on for a long time. But like a frog, like if you put a frog in cold water, it can get warmer like slowly over time, and then suddenly it's too hot and the frog boils to death before it's able to jump out. So I realized like this had been going on for a long time, the kind of unhealthy relationship. But it's like I almost like wasn't aware of it until I became aware.
Okay. And if I understand you correctly, you had no support in a foreign country. And if I remember you saying that you were actually unable to go back to England.
Yeah. Well, so I'll talk about being
Okay.
unable to go home, but I just want to clarify, it's not that I had no support. Actually, I was able to build extremely amazing support within the community. But I didn't have that at the like I had to build that, and I had to work for that. I was living in a place where initially I didn't know anybody. But there was support when I started seeking it out. But
Do you mean like in your intimate relationships, not in a formal, like it wasn't like you joined some kind of divorce support group, but you created individual relationships? Is that what you mean?
Well, everything actually. I did go to a support group at I can't remember the name now of there was a like mental health foundation, Muslim mental health foundation in Chicago. And they
Okay.
had a support group I went to. So that was really amazing. But also, friends of friends, anybody I knew who knew somebody close to where I was living, like suddenly this whole network appeared. And, at the time, it never felt like enough because what I was going through was a lot. But when I look back, actually, it was a lot of support. But I think so now to turn to the being unable to return home, when you're unable to return home because of a custody issue, without your family, like I said, in a foreign country where you just don't know anything about how this stuff works, different laws, rules, customs, there is kind of like you can never really have enough support. Like if you're not at home, how are you ever going to get all the support you need? But I think as much as I could be supported, I feel like I was.
Okay, that's great. Would you like to talk about when you speak about challenges, you mentioned those things. Were they emotional challenges? For example, self-esteem issues, anger issues, whatever else that might arise from a divorce?
Oh, like issues post-divorce?
Right, because what are these challenges that you faced during your divorce and after? So you mentioned logistical issues in terms of being a foreigner in a foreign, in a place without like family support, for example. But were there emotional aspect to that as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you think your life is going one way, and then suddenly, like overnight, it goes the other way. And you feel like your life is kind of over. Like especially in my situation where suddenly you realize you are kind of trapped because of the custody stuff. And so that led to a whole host of emotional issues, I would say, and also just being like unable to escape because, like, again, at the custody thing, I feel like that really is like the big issue because that's kind of what trapped me. So yeah, I think like anger, feeling lonely, feeling like just angry at people even if they are trying to support you. That's why I say, like, when I look back, I feel like I did have good support, but at the time it was almost like I couldn't fully see the support that I had. Like I couldn't fully appreciate it because I was so caught up in like
The
my life
distress,
going.
right?
Yeah, the distress. Yeah.
Right. So all of those challenges, how did you overcome them?
With time, I mean, I think that anger is a natural human emotion, and a good advice I had from a mentor was use your anger productively, channel it into like pushing your life forward. And so in my case, that meant finishing my studies, getting my degree, trying to build a career, and spending time with people who encouraged that and helped me feel like good, like supported me in that, and gave me motivation, gave me, all the positive feedback I needed to be successful in that way. And so, yeah, surrounding myself with that type of support, and then using negative emotion to give myself energy and drive.
Okay, well, I think that's really incredible, mashallah, that you, with a little baby, because I'm sure she was very young at the time, to go through school and finish all you need to do, and to also just learn the ropes of navigating how do you get things done in another country. So that's a huge feat, mashallah. Okay, and then if you had to look back, what did you wish that you did, or the support that you wish that you had?
Um,
You could just go back and do anything differently.
Looking back, from the moment that I knew divorce was happening, I don't know if I don't think I have any regrets. I think the situation was really horrific, and I think I handled it to the best I could. But if I had to do anything differently, it would have been to end the marriage sooner. I mean, it would have been to have seen the red flags from the beginning, even before the marriage. Even when I first moved here, it would have been to stop it in its tracks much sooner. It would have been to listen to people who gave me advice at the beginning. It would have been to be honest with my friends and family about what was going on in my marriage, instead of it being this closed secret. So the things I would change would really have been to, I mean, I think I had advice even just 2 months before the initial breakup happened to leave. And even if I'd left just 2 months earlier, it would have made a huge difference. Like, I just wish I had seen red flags and not got myself into a deeper and deeper hole.
Are you willing to speak about how ending it 2 months earlier could have made a difference?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to talk about, but I mean, even ending it before my daughter was born, for example, that would have avoided a lot of
Custody issues.
I mean, that's hard to get into, but I mean, just what I'm trying to say is any earlier, like even 2 months earlier, like a year earlier, 2 years earlier, or just never having, like, just the sooner the better. Like, what I'm trying to say is, when you realize that you're unsafe and your marriage is toxic, there's no point. I mean, you can't keep making it worse for yourself. Like, you need to, when you've got to that point, go forward. I wish I had done it earlier.
Okay. Are you willing, for the sake of our audience who are watching this, would you be willing to mention some red flags to be aware of prior to marriage?
Yeah. Well, the first one is kind of hard to recognize, especially when you're young, because I was very young. Love bombing. I was love bombed and told a lot of lies about what our life was going to be like, and I believed it all. And I was very blown away by signs of affection. And I was really naive. And I mean, it's really hard to say to a young person, you're naive. This is all like, none of this is actually good. Because, it's hard to convince somebody who's in that mode, but that is already like one red flag. Others were seeing early on, actually, like, my ex-husband did reveal his nature, I would say, pretty early on. It's just that I had made this huge step of moving countries, that I was so invested that I didn't want to see red flags. So that's the other thing. It's like, when you do see something or feel something is wrong, don't feel like, oh, I'm too ashamed to go back to my family. I'm too ashamed to tell people this didn't work out. Because when you know it inside of you that it's not what you thought it was going to be, and you were just, okay, I'm just going to make it work. I have to make it work. I can't you know, I can't let this be a failure, it's just going to end up being a bigger failure later on. So other red flags, or I mean, I guess lies, like when somebody tells you one thing and then you realize it's not true. I mean, I think any lie is a red flag. And I think that's something I try to hold myself to account to now in a new relationship. Any lie, like anything that is not exactly what happened, anything where you're fudging the truth, even like if like I want to do that, I realize that's the beginning of like an unhealthy dynamic with the other person. And so as soon as I saw that in my first marriage, I think that should have been a way out. I think the first sign of physical violence for me, I would say, is like the end, because once it happens once, it will only ever happen again and get worse. And you know, there could be several years in between, but we're talking about over a lifetime here. And I think the moment that you feel that aggression as a woman, the moment you feel that aggression from a man, the moment you feel that it's aggression, even if they tell you it's not and apologize and they didn't know and they didn't realize, but the moment you feel that this person is being aggressive towards you and intimidating you, that is like the moment that you should never let yourself be convinced it wasn't what you thought it was, because it was.
Right. And that would be gaslighting, right? That, oh, you're just overreacting, it's not a big deal, it isn't what you think it was.
Yeah. I guess I'm hesitant to talk about gaslighting because I feel like people talk about it a lot these days. And I guess there's probably maybe a lot of resources on that, but yeah, gaslighting is a huge thing. But I would say like more than just like using the word gaslighting, like what does it mean to experience it? It's like, that's what I'm trying to say. Like when you experience that feeling that somebody is being aggressive or intimidating towards you, don't forget that, because that's real. And that's like one of the a major red flag, like that, and lies, dishonesty, and coupled with love bombing at the beginning of a relationship. I mean, all three of those things happened in such a short period of time in my marriage that like it's just like so textbook, and such a textbook study of textbook like case study of an unhealthy and an abusive relationship.
Right. Do you think it would have been different if you involved certain seniors, whether it's like a selected wakil or, you know, somebody to kind of like vet the guy? You think it would have made a difference if you had someone involved early on?
Well, I did to some degree. Like I did. I mean, so I think that the problem is that I don't think that means that much, because it's really easy for somebody to come across as really wonderfully on a community level, in a religious community, but it just doesn't mean anything for what goes on behind closed doors, unfortunately. And so yeah, I did, but the problem was I wasn't honest with what I was experiencing. Like I think those people who had maybe like vetted or been involved at the beginning, if I had then, you know, a year later come back and said, well, this is what I'm now experiencing, maybe that would have helped. But if you don't, like, I wasn't honest with anybody because I didn't want to admit failure until, and that's why I said like fear of failure is not a reason to stay in a relationship, because what will happen is eventually it'll be an even bigger failure, which is what happened.
It'll just be like a snowball effect. It's only going to get worse and worse and worse.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I'm sure that there are people out there, women out there who are watching this, who are in what you've described as quite a toxic relationship. What would you say that they should do right now? And they think, oh my God, what am I going to do? Like, it's just so complex. How am I going to get out of this? Where am I going to go? Who's going to help me? You know, and then it becomes like the norm that they're just okay to just handle, you know, because it's familiar.
Yeah. I mean, for me, like, it comes down to the person's decision to leave or not leave. Like, if you know that you need to leave, then then do it. but some people don't know that they need to leave, and I wouldn't try to advise somebody to get out of a relationship if they don't already kind of know within inside themselves that this relationship is unhealthy. Because I think you have to know it to be able to get through it. So if somebody knows that a relationship is unhealthy, but they're staying in it because they don't know what to do otherwise, in that case, yeah, I would advise and try to support somebody in that situation to leave. But only if they had kind of come to that conclusion that something was fundamentally wrong.
Mm-hmm. Would you recommend that they try to find some kind of mental health support group?
Yeah, and talk to people who've been through it, like watch these videos. I think maybe for some women, maybe they don't know other women from their community who are divorced. Maybe it's something maybe that's not spoken about enough, or if people are divorced, they don't, or remarried, like they don't talk about the fact they were divorced before, and so it's not normalized. And I don't mean normalized to say that divorce should just be, you know, an easy thing anybody does, but I mean normalized in the sense that it's we understand it, and it's acceptable in circumstances that need it. And so I think talking about it in that way, and like these YouTube videos, like I would say, somebody go and listen to stories.
Mm-hmm.
And actually that's something I initially wanted to do in the initial like days, weeks, months of my divorce, is wanting to like speak to women and hear their stories and get people to share stories with each other, because that is really I think that's super transformational.
Yes, that's exactly how this came about, is because I remember I went to the library and I saw all these books on the shelf, but everything was very clinical, very dry, how to overcome financial issues, etc., etc. And then I picked one book, which was by an editor, and it was autobiographical and written like a story. And I remember taking shots on my phone with it, and there were times when I was just crying because she was echoing so much of what I was experiencing. And there was it's almost cathartic to be able to relate to others who've been through that similar experience, you know?
Oh yeah, completely. Yeah, I actually, now you're reminding me that I used to spend hours on the phone with women I'd never even met. Like women I'd never met, they were friends of friends of friends who would tell me their stories and then listen to mine, and we'd just talk about how it's like the same thing over and over again in these types of marriages and divorces. And that gave me so much strength, because it made me confident in what I knew to be true. And it gave me the confidence and like the emotional support I needed to just kind of survive. Because I also was surrounded by many people, including friends, who told me I shouldn't be doing this. Because, you know, with a young baby, I should try again. I should, you know, give it more time. Or people who just didn't understand why something so sudden could happen, and why a relationship could go from looking like a normal, you know, young couple who, you know, are successful, to suddenly being the opposite, with like courts and lawyers and police, like overnight. Like people couldn't understand that. Did also make me feel really, really terrible. I mean, I had somebody tell me that I was never going to finish my degree, and that I was like never going to have anything in life, and I should stay in my marriage, because that's the only way I'm gonna have any future. And yeah, I mean, I had that type of stuff too. So like speaking to and hearing stories from women was really, really everything I needed.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing every divorced woman can attest to is that from the outside, people have absolutely no idea what's happening on the inside, right?
Oh yeah.
Judgments. Oh, but you guys look like such a lovely couple. Oh my gosh, what happened? And then you almost feel like you're supposed to, like, you know, be in a court of law and justify all of the reasons and make them see what it is that went wrong. And in that way, it can almost be further isolating, because you just feel like, wow, even they don't understand, right?
Yeah. I mean, and I had a lot of good friends that did understand, and I had a lot of friends
Right,
who
which is wonderful.
had also told me that my relationship was abusive and I needed to leave. I mean, I had a lot of that. It was just a mixed bag, right? So some people who immediately understood, some people who didn't understand and just stopped talking to me, and some people who said horrible things, like, you know. So it was a complete, it was a mixed bag. And I completely agree, like, people on the outside don't know what's going on in the inside. But good friends and perceptive people will understand.
Mhm. Right. Now, if you could look back and meet Rosie in her young self, her, you could say the unmarried, single Rosie, what advice would you give her?
Be confident in yourself and don't feel the need to like follow the love story somebody is like dangling in front of you. And yeah, just be confident in yourself and don't feel scared, because I think that the in some weird way, like, fear is maybe what pushed me into my first marriage. Like, not fear of the marriage, but fear of like what else, like not knowing what else I would do, and not being excited about life and just feeling like, okay, I can do this.
Wait, when you talk about fear, do you mean fear in terms of not knowing what to do career-wise, or fear of being single? Or
You know, I think it was like kind of subconscious. I think at that age, if you asked me, am I scared? I wouldn't have said yes. But I think that I was like subconsciously like not confident in what I was going to do in life. Like, I didn't feel like I had this kind of confident plan that I was going ahead with. And so that's why like the love bombing and the prospect of this great life with this person seemed very attractive.
it was exciting, like it's offering you
Yeah,
a plan.
it seemed exciting. It seemed like, okay, so as you mentioned in my bio, I'd already lived abroad for a long time. I'd lived in the Middle East. I was learning new languages. And I just felt like, oh, okay, this is really exciting. This is like, this is somebody's offering me like love and adventure, and I'm going to go to the United States, and that's a whole new world of opportunity over there. And that seemed like exciting because I don't think I was confident and excited about my own life individually,
Mhm. I
which I
see
should have been. I had no reason not to be. Like, you know what I mean? I had no reason not to be like confident in what I was doing in my own life prior to the marriage.
So all these other women out there who experience these same feelings of this emotional experience of lack of confidence, of there's some fear underneath all of that. Do you have any advice for those women? How do you like fill up the blanks, heal those aspects that are lacking or need some work before embarking upon making a lifetime commitment, really? Of course, with a good intention, it'll be lifetime. Not necessarily it will end up that way.
I think it's an inward journey, introspection, and an inward journey about like feeling confident in yourself is not to do with anything external to you. It's just to do with your inward well-being. And yeah, I would say that would be my advice, is to look inwards. And I don't mean look inwards and shut yourself off to the world, but like, I don't know, like maybe understand what unresolved issues you have and sit with that, and then try to understand how whatever unresolved inner issues you have might be driving a sense of fear and uncertainty, and make sure that you don't let those emotions push you towards a marriage.
Right. So it sounds to me to be more self-aware, more self-attuned. And that,
Yeah, I think so, because I think abusive relationships prey on people who are not fully who are not confident, but not confident because maybe they're not fully self-aware. Um, And so the like the abuser kind of takes more and more of you and puts you down and makes you more and more convinced that you're a terrible person and that you're nobody. But they are only able to do that because you want initially, I guess I'm not trying to blame it on the victim here, but like their victim is there maybe taken advantage of because they were already had some sort of emotional something that this person has picked up on.
Absolutely. I mean, we see this, tests of science studies have been done that even if you have a mugger or an attacker or a rapist or something, they will attack on women who have very insecure body language. They don't have like a strong stride. And so, yeah, of course, they just make themselves more susceptible to becoming prey, of course.
Yeah, because exactly. An abuser preys upon your weak spot, and
Mhm.
all of us have weak spots, and that's the other thing I always like to say is anybody can end up in an abusive relationship because we all have weak spots, and if somebody latches onto that and feeds on that, anybody, the most confident, outgoing, successful person can get dragged down into an abusive relationship. So actually, I guess it's advice to all women because we all have emotional weaknesses that we need. I guess introspection and self-awareness is something that, everybody, like we should all be doing. But particularly, I think when you're contemplating marriage, is make sure that there isn't like a weak part of you or emotionally unresolved part of you that is driving you towards this marriage.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, you see that the marriage isn't somehow going to solve that issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always think that marriage should be qishta, should be cream, an additional aspect to whatever is happening in your life, right? It can't be there to like actually solve the issue. So there are women out there who are experiencing trauma right now, going through their divorce. Do you have any advice for them right now?
Women going through trauma, reach out to networks. Don't be afraid to speak. Tell people what you're going through and ask for support. That's what I did. I just started talking to everybody, and I found all of these phone buddies, like I said, of people I haven't even met.
Okay, so how do you find a phone buddy? Tell us about that.
Well, divorce is common. So if you know community members,
Oh, so is it through word of mouth? Like somebody puts you in touch with someone, puts you in touch with someone?
Yeah, like when you start talking about what you're going through, somebody will know somebody. Like if you talk to enough people, somebody will know somebody. And what I've found is there's kind of this network of women who've been through trauma and divorce, and anybody who's been through it is kind of willing to speak on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I this was my experience. So, and maybe I just am good at speaking about my issues, so that made it easier for me because I was able to speak and communicate like what was going on for me. I was very comfortable. Not comfortable is the wrong word, but I was just very open because I felt like I was in so much distress that the way I handled that was just telling everybody. And then that brought all of these wider networks. And so I would advise women to do the same thing. I mean, this stuff shouldn't be hidden. And that's the other thing is like, it's the hidden nature of it that makes it so traumatic. One of the things that makes it so traumatic. And so that's why I would say to women going through trauma, well, don't let it be hidden. I mean, I know we have this practice of like hiding the faults of others, but I think maybe might be some misguided understandings of that. And so, which, I'm not really the person to get into what exactly that means, but I think when you're going through trauma and when you are being oppressed, being able to talk about that and it's not about broadcasting it, it's about finding support. And that would be my advice.
100%. That's what we aim to do, is to normalize the conversation. She should never feel that she's alone. So many people going through the same situation. And as
Yeah.
much as possible. And the worst thing one can do is to just suppress and internalize that emotional experience. It can really make one quite sick, in fact. So thank you. And I do know that you have moved on and you are in a second marriage, mashallah. However, and I also know that it's not that that was the end and now it's happily ever after, because there are ongoing communication and challenges that you are met with regarding your first marriage. However, in terms of overcoming that divorce, and do you have any self-realizations of what happened to you internally as a person post-divorce? This is prior to meeting your second husband, right?
What happened to me? I think that it did kill like a part of me. I hate to say that, but I think, all of our experiences change us and affect us, for better and for worse. I think in many ways I am the same person I was before that marriage, but I think in other ways there's a part of me that's kind of being stamped out. I think that I had to become quite ruthless to be able to deal with this person. And I think that was I'm sad about that, because then that does eventually start to affect you and your, just who you are as a person.
Do
So
you think that's revivable? Do you think it's gone completely? Or do you think that sort of aspect, it can be nurtured again?
yeah, I mean maybe it can, but it's like, for me, I'm in a second marriage, but as you said, what went on in the first marriage still hasn't completely gone away. I mean, mainly because of the custody situation. So, 5 years later, it's still ongoing. And so that means that it's really hard to fully move on, even though I feel like I have moved on, mostly or nearly entirely. But it does. I mean, it does change you, but it's hard to put into words. I don't know. I mean, friends of mine who've known me from, childhood, it's something I don't really like talking about because it's obviously a little bit sad, but I do think that it has had a deep effect on me. There's no point lying about that.
Okay, now, if I was on the outside looking in, what I would find to be quite a challenge and interesting to navigate is that person is moved on from their divorce. They want to heal. They want to be well. They want to have a sense of internal balance, equilibrium, peacefulness. However, you constantly are butting heads with this ex because you have a shared child, and it's going to continue. And every time that interaction happens with an individual, it stirs up negativity and these really horrible emotions, anger. And correct me if I'm wrong, but having those emotions, it affects oneself. You don't feel good on the inside because nobody wants to harbor this kind of emotions. That I would perceive it to be a huge challenge and a goal to reach a place where one is almost able to be more unaffected, not have that emotional reaction, because we don't want to be there anymore. It just makes us unwell. Maybe it's something you're still struggling with, but if you have any advice for how to reach that, maintain kind of to retain your sense of zen, of peace, of your inner compass of I don't stand for that, and I'm not going to fall into these kind of very, very low frequency emotions.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, I completely agree. The goal is to get to the point where you're unaffected by those interactions. That's a very hard place to get to because, as you said, it's constantly re-traumatizing you, and you never have the time to recover from it. But with time it is possible, because what I've done is you just try to put it in a box, and sometimes you have to allow the person to threaten or say they're going to do all of this stuff, and then just see if they're actually going to do it, because most of the time it's threats. It's not real. And then the more you realize that actually they have no power over you, there's nothing they can do to you, that you realize, then that's freeing, when you realize that they actually, there's just nothing, no way this person can affect you. And even the things that maybe they could do, that it actually doesn't affect you at the end of the day, like you moved on. And you have to just keep telling yourself that, and actually believe it and know it, that it's has no impact on you.
So I mean, unless you're really coaching yourself that this person just wants to manipulate, intimidate, overpower, way to attain some kind of semblance of control. And ultimately, you know what? There's no meat behind any of it, really. And that I'm not going to allow it myself to succumb to those, horrible intentions. They just.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're obviously dealing with a situation where you are under physical threat, like there is a security issue going on, which God forbid, I'm sure that is the case for some people. So in that situation, it's different. I can't really speak to that, because after my divorce, that was safety and violence, or sometimes an issue, but not. I don't think I've ever. It was mostly resolved, let's say mostly, but so as long as you're not facing, I would say, like the physical threat anymore, you have to just tell yourself, what is the worst this person can do to me? And actually just imagine that happening, and realizing and walking through it in your head, this actually isn't that bad. The person is just trying to keep psychological control over you, because they think that this stuff scares you. But once you realize it doesn't scare you, and it, like, what is the worst that can happen? And make peace with what could happen, then you just don't need to be scared anymore. And like I said, as long as what could happen is not physically threatening, then you don't need to be scared, because there's nothing that person can take away from you. I mean, and sometimes it can be really hard. I mean, in my situation, like I just to make this more kind of intelligible, like I'm not saying it's easy, because I had never worked before my divorce. I didn't have a career outside of my studies, and I was in a situation where I was, because of the custody, I was unable to move, like even unable to move out of the city I was living in. And that was really restrictive for how I was going to make a living, because the only field that I felt like made sense for me required mobility, to be able to move and travel. And so I felt like this person my ex was kind of controlling every aspect of my life, through limiting my movement and limiting my mobility, and limiting what I felt like was limiting my professional development as somebody in a foreign country who didn't have a career before that point. And when I realized that actually this person does not have that control over me, then things started to change. But he used the fear that I had that he could control everything in my life. So I just started taking control of things in my life, realizing that he has no control anymore. So I started making my own financial decisions. I used some money I had to make an investment. I started taking my life into my hands.
That must have been quite empowering.
It was hard. It's still hard. Yeah. But yeah, it was, and it is.
So you mentioned that how that divorce affected you. You mentioned how a certain aspect of you has been, what did you say? Like almost died in a way? Okay. Was there anything positive though coming out of that? And you underwent, I'm sure, some kind of a healing journey before deciding to get remarried, which is another question that we have. But before, in that interim period, were there any For example, what comes to my mind is resilience. It appears that you are far more resilient post-divorce than you were prior to divorce.
Yeah, resilience, also becoming closer to my family again. So that was a really good thing. I wish I'd talked more about my family in this, to be honest, because that was like a really important thing, is realizing the importance of family and being close to my family, and not succumbing to certain types of modern lifestyles where, very individualistic. And so that was a good thing. And you mentioned resilience and confidence.
I was going to say, any attitudes about yourself that changed, the way you perceive Rosie, the way you feel about Rosie, was anything that changed there?
Yeah, I think that I realized things about myself that I always had, but I just didn't know I had. Like the confidence and the resilience and the kind of go-getter attitude. I think actually I was always like that. I just didn't know it. Like it brought all of those good things out. And it confidence, resilience, go-getter attitude, I would say. Like making things happen. Like I'm like much more aware that actually I can make things happen. I can do things if I set my mind to it. That definitely came out of the divorce.
Excellent. Wow. Now, moving on to your second marriage, how do you know that you are ready to move on? How does anyone know that they're ready to move on to a second marriage or with subsequent marriage?
That's a good question. I don't think anybody can like know, but part of life is not being too scared. And for a while I was scared about having a new relationship, because I thought, how will I ever know if there's a red flag? And what if I start imagining red flags? Like I just thought I'm going to go one of two ways: either ignore red flags and be in the same situation, or think everything's a red flag and not trust anybody. I wasn't sure how I could ever be balanced in feeling like trusting my intuition. And so that's actually, to go back to the previous question, that's another good thing that came out of the divorce, is I started to finally understand, or try to understand, this idea of intuition, that sometimes you just know, and it doesn't have to be completely like a logical, rational thing. Sometimes you, in your heart, but that you always have to combine, obviously, intuition with rational thinking, but it's like just being that kind of sense of balance. But I think the more I started to be aware of that, of being balanced, not being too scared, not being like overly paranoid, and looking inside of myself and thinking, are the reasons I'm doing this the same reasons that led me to my first marriage? Am I just copying the same thing over and over again? Because that's often what happens to people without realizing it. But by even thinking about those things to begin with, like asking myself, am I doing the same thing in another way? Like that, I felt, that's when I started to feel like I was more confident in being ready for a new relationship. And then you have to be, or at least for me, I felt one of the reasons I felt ready is because I never felt like I had to make this work at all costs and I had to do this. Because if you are like desperate to make something work, or desperate to, get into a new marriage, then that's when, again, you're opening yourself up to something unhealthy and not being able to see it. But I was kind of clear that I'm not looking for this in order to make me happy, that like I have to have this happen. It's like,
I mean, there's no dependency, or there's almost like a detachment to the outcome.
Yeah, feeling like not feeling too attached to any particular outcome, just being like, I'm going to see where this leads. I'm going to follow my intuition. I'm going to think carefully and rationally, and I'm not going to go quickly. I don't need to try to, lock a man in, like, convince him that I'm the right one. It's like, it's going to be two ways. And yeah, not being attached to like getting an outcome and not being attached to getting a quick outcome. All of those things made me feel ready, that I was in that place where I didn't feel that I was doing this out of fear, or that it had to be a certain way, or that I needed this for my, well-being or security or sense of self.
Did you work it through by yourself, or did you take the counsel of like a therapist or someone to help you?
Yeah, I had some. I was in therapy for a while at Tet Leaf. In terms of like the, I mean, preparing for a new relationship, I was maybe not the focus of that therapy. But I had spent a long time just with myself, like thinking, and like I mentioned throughout this interview, introspection, talking with my friends, and even like trying to talk through like, are there red flags? Like those were never discussions I had in the lead up to my first marriage. Like I didn't have like honest conversations or honest reflections. And I was ready to go like slowly, and that was really helpful. Involving family. Yeah.
Are you willing to tell us what is it about your second husband that made you realize that, yes, this is a good match for me? This is what I want.
Oh,
Something happy to end off with.
I guess when somebody like makes you into a better person, and when you feel like you are a better person, and when you are being encouraged to be the best version of yourself, and you feel it and you are that, and it's like that was something that I found, and I felt like I mean, I want to, I hope I'm doing that on the other, like reciprocally as well. But that I felt like was the main, or like the first reason where I felt like I know this is good, because in my first marriage, I don't think there was, after the initial love bombing, I don't think there was ever a moment where I was made to feel good about myself. I think that I was put down in everything. And I was initially kind of okay with that, because I was trying to practice a whole idea of like tazkiyah to nafs, and like, no arrogance, and don't think highly of yourself. But then that led to me being with somebody who never had a good thing to say about me.
That's a very important point, because, wow, that's a very important point, because there's a danger there where people want to, embody these very noble traits of like zuhud and tazkiyah, purification, and, tawadu, humility. But then there's a fine balance, because it doesn't mean that we in any way are supposed to be okay with abusive treatment, right?
Exactly. And so that was like a huge contrast for me in my second marriage, and when I was getting to know the man who became my second husband, that actually this is a person who makes me feel good about myself, and who makes me feel good about everything about myself, actually. Not because like I'm perfect. It's not really about that. It's about like, when somebody makes you feel good about yourself, then you actually can continue to practice like virtuous, praiseworthy traits.
It makes
But
you flourish, of course.
yeah, you flourish.
It makes you flourish, right?
Yeah. And somebody who doesn't, question or mock is a better word, doesn't, mock and put down the bad parts of you, but who like who's not like, their goal is not to try to change you. Because that's the other thing, is like, in my first marriage, the whole like putting me down thing was often framed as almost like irshad, like
Trying to make you better
guide,
for your own
guide
good.
to make you better. Like, let's study the kaba'ir of Imam Zahabi. Let's study, like, the major sins. There's that book. I don't know if you know it.
Okay.
You probably know it. Yeah, because this is how you're going to be a better person. Let's go through every single one and see how you do all of those. So this is not something a husband.
Wow. So he used, sorry, it was
Yeah.
using religious texts
Yeah.
means to
Yeah.
manipulate or control you.
Yeah. And
In
the
a
thing
very, oh, we're just using this text, but actually there was an agenda behind it.
Yeah, and so the thing is that is not confusing the role of a husband for the role of a sheikh. So if you have like a spiritual guide who goes through your negative traits with you or tries to help you be a better person, that's, if you have that type of relationship with a spiritual teacher, I mean, I'm not saying people should, but if you have, that's very different to what is okay in a marriage. Like, it's not like in my second marriage, that's when I suddenly realized, wait, it's not the role of my husband to point out my negative traits and tell me I have to improve. It's the role of my husband to make me feel good about myself. Like, if he thought I had traits that were not good, he shouldn't marry me. Like, we're not everybody is compatible with everybody. So you realize you're compatible with somebody when you're not obsessed by these terrible things they do, not because they don't have bad qualities, but like, the role of a spouse is to bring out the best in you and to make you feel good about yourself. And like you mentioned the word flourishing, because it's only when you flourish that you can improve.
Then you also, when your tank is full, then you are more in a better space to actually look at your negative traits, and you almost want to be better because you're almost like stronger and you can recognize the good, and so now you're more able to look at the bad.
Exactly. And it's not for your spouse to focus on the bad. That's for you to do. And so this type of stuff comes up even in like really mundane things like housework. Like, all couples, maybe not all, but a lot of couples fight about housework. That's kind of normal. But so I'm not saying that's a reason why people should get divorced sometimes, but like in an unhealthy relationship, like, instead of your spouse making you feel good and energized so that you want to contribute to running the house, they make you feel down and negative. So you never
useless, pathetic.
Yeah. So you do less and less. And so that's like a manifestation of like a dynamic that can affect all areas of a marital life, not just something mundane like housework, but like a unhealthy relationship will make your bad qualities worse because they focus on that and they tell you how terrible you are all the time and everything and never have anything good to say about you. Whereas in a healthy relationship, your negative traits should, with time, improve, like, not because you're happy. So
Wow.
So I started experiencing those contrasts, and that's one of the things that made me feel like this, that I was ready for this when I suddenly saw what I hope to be, inshallah, a healthy relationship, and I started experiencing that.
Did you notice there was a certain point when, like, I'm trusting again, I can trust?
Yeah, but I think this is one of the things where I said, like, it's hard to undo some of the negative things about the divorce, is I think I still have trust issues. So yeah, it's kind of hard not to.
Anything else you'd like to say in closing, Rosie?
No, that's it.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your vulnerability and openness and your honesty in sharing. And I wish you all the happiness in your second marriage with your daughter. And I also believe that what you have said can benefit many women out there.
I hope so. That was the intention behind doing this. So
okay, take care and all the best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.